Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sun Point Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sun Point Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sun Point Investments.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor right here on the Epsilon Theory YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler. I'm joined this week by, so he's chopped wood and carried water. I know this, he's a samurai philosophy dork. He's scalped options and carried yen. He's an FX dork too. He's blocked strategies and written movie scripts, and we are going to get into that. He's danced to electronic music and Oakenfeld some Pauls. We're going to cover some EDM too. He's written books, blogs, daily notes, fantastic formulas for alpha generation at the human level that you should gladly trade $29.99 for. It's on Amazon, at least at that price right now. Move over, Daft Punk. This punk right here created an entire Daft Planet. Brent Donnelly, welcome to the show.
Wow, that's the most exciting intro that I've ever received for any podcast ever. So that's a very exciting way to get started. Let's not peak early though.
No, because I like to think of it, there's just so many Easter eggs inside of this intro. So if we don't get to them all, I'm going to try. And first question, because I love a counterfactual. This Daft Planet has brought me so much joy getting ready for this thing. And hopefully we're going to get to the movie script too, because Brent contains multitudes if you can't tell already. But I mean, you created the first Flash cartoon back in like 2001-ish. And I promise I'll shut up and you're going to talk a lot after this, but I just want to read this so people can get an idea.
Sure.
The plot, this is from the interwebs. The plot, set in the fictional Maple City, encircles the day-to-day lives of the protagonists, Ched and Hudson, in their ongoing struggle to keep up with, I'm going to put some emphasis on this, to keep up with the latest trends and maintain their positions in the social hierarchy in high school, with Ched living from a trailer park as the son of a taxidermist and Hudson as the son of a wealthy network executive. A parallel is drawn between the two characters, offering unlikely chemistry. Brent, tell us what Daft Planet was for a second.
Oh, baby.
How the hell this happened?
So just to kind of rewind a little bit before that, growing up, I was always kind of like a tension between writing and finance, math kind of stuff. So like, I think I kind of wanted to be a journalist. Then I found out how much journalists get paid. And part of my goal as a kid was like to get out of like, whatever, lower middle class, Ottawa, Canada, and like see the world and do something a little bit more big and exciting. And so that was in the days of like Wall Street, the movie, Liar's Poker, and things like that. So once I got, and ironically, both of those are cautionary tales, as is Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. And yet those are the three things that drag people into Wall Street the most, the three pieces of art that bring people to Wall Street. And they're all cautionary tales. But anyways, so I decided to be a trader and got into finance and like went to business school and all that. And then when I got there, it wasn't really what I envisioned. It was more like dealing blackjack all day or something like that. Like you love blackjack and then you're like, okay, I'm going to be a blackjack dealer. And then you go deal blackjack and you're like, oh, wait a sec. This isn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be. Because in those days, it was very flow oriented. So like you just sat there and people were screaming like sell 20. I mean, in those days it was mark yen, like the Deutschmark was still a thing. So people would be like, sell 20 million mark yen, buy 3.4 CAD yen, whatever. And you're just trying to basically keep your position and execute for clients. So it was very, like, I don't want to say robotic, but it was very reactionary, and there was no like risk taking or like position or prop or macro or anything like that when I was doing it in the 90s. And so I was like, oh, I think I made a mistake here. I'm just going to quit. And at that time, I was living in New York at that time, and a friend and I had written a movie script, and it was like 1998. So NASDAQ wealth was starting to build, and we were like super naive. So we're like, let's get this movie made. We're going to raise money from all these people that made all this money from the NASDAQ bubble and who IPO'd their companies. So I quit. I went home. And actually, a little fun fact there was when I quit, literally everyone, like my parents, my people that I worked with, everyone was like, dude, you're throwing away like this high paying job. What are you doing? This is like, you're wasting such an opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And the only person that didn't say that was John Key, who was my boss's boss at the time, who went on to be Prime Minister of New Zealand. But at the time, he was head of foreign exchange trading. So I always give him a lot of credit for that, for supporting my dreams. But anyways.
What did he say to you? What did he say?
He said, you're young. You'll have a chance to come back if this doesn't work out. Just go chase whatever people say, just go chase it. And even if you fail, it doesn't really matter. And actually that was right. Cause in the end it kind of failed, but it was okay. So, I went home, we started trying to raise money for this movie. And it was like this very dark thing. Like I'm into like dark art, like Requiem for a Dream and Train Spotting and all that kind of stuff. So it was in that kind of vein. It wasn't as drug fueled as those movies, but it was a dark, very dark script. And so we weren't getting any traction. And a couple of people were saying, so I was doing it with a friend of mine, and people were saying, like, you guys are kind of funny. Why don't you do something funny? Like, this is dark as shit. All these characters are like so unlikable. And so we made a pilot. I had like $35,000 at that time because I had sold my apartment. And so I put 10 grand into this. We made this pilot. And so we wrote it, we storyboarded it, and literally we would go to a bar every day when it opened at like noon, and I would stand there and pose, and my friend would draw the stills, and we'd scan the stills and send the stills to this like really cheap animation place, and they made a pilot for us, and then we used that pilot to pitch the show. The show was called Daft Planet, and as you kind of recounted, it was basically like two kids. It was kind of like, it was in the days of like post Beavis and Butthead, but when South Park was huge. So the idea at that time was like animation quality isn't that important. It's just about story and character, and animation quality doesn't matter that much. So it was pretty janky animation. I don't know if you watched it on YouTube, but there's some episodes.
I know about
YouTube.
The missing necks. I got over it real fast, but I did find some on YouTube.
We got an animation studio to pick it up. And we made 13 episodes, which we wrote, and it was super fun. Like we casted all the voices. We worked with the director. The director, actually, his claim to fame was he won an Academy Award for Best Short in like 1978 or something like that. But anyways, so we made the show. It was on TV for a while. And then, so I was making a little bit of money doing that. But then I took my other $25,000 and put it into a day trading account because the bubble was happening. And then I was kind of doing both of those things for like 5 years. So I was like self-employed from 1998 to 2003. And, it was a very good time. And then I don't know where you want to go from there. I can tell you where that went, or we can talk about something else, whatever you want.
We're going to go back. Let's go back to the beginning from
Sure.
there, because I think, man, it's just such a fascinating journey and I think it's important you go through a journey like that somewhere around there in life. You need to not just upend the apple cart, but like roll down the hill with it, like barely survives falling across the freeway or some crazy metaphor. So where in Canada did you grow up? And I want you to answer this from the perspective that, at least me as an American, I talk about like Canada like it's one place. So maybe give a little more context.
Yeah, no,
because
it's not one place. So I'm from Ottawa, which is like a government town. It would be similar to Geneva or DC, like a lot of big, brutal concrete buildings, some cool stuff like good museums and things like that. Great place to raise a family. Pretty boring, I would say overall, but like not bad at all. It's a solid city. And like I said, we didn't have like tons of money growing up. We weren't like poor, but sometimes like if there was like a trip to Europe, I wasn't going on that kind of thing. Like I sometimes could do things, sometimes couldn't. And that bugged me because I went to a school where a lot of people were wealthy. And so my godparents, who were like my parents' best friends, had a lot of money. They had started an ad agency, and they owned the building that their agency was in, and it was on like the super outskirts of Ottawa, like in the middle of nowhere. And then as years went on, Ottawa expanded, and then so now this building was like in this sweet location. So they were able to sell it, and like they were loaded. So they had a daughter, and they used to take me away with them on trips to like Barbados and stuff, which in like 1983, that's a pretty big deal. Like now everyone goes to the Caribbean. It's just like, that's just like very common. But in the 80s, going to the Caribbean was like a pretty big deal. So I kind of saw like, whoa, there's this whole other world out there. And that's kind of where like I've written a lot about my relationship with money, because I just find it a super interesting topic, but also because I think money can be a very positive force and then a very negative force, and you kind of have to understand what it's doing for you. But for me, I think when I was young, it was a very positive force driving me towards like wanting to do something different, and it was kind of driving my academic success and my ambition. And it was all really because I saw this glimpse of like, wow, there's this whole other world out there, which maybe I wouldn't have known about if it wasn't for my godparents. So yeah, that's kind of where everything started. And like I said, I remember doing one of those like tests when you're about, I think 6th or 7th grade, maybe 8th grade, where it's like, I like talking to people, or I don't like talking to people, like one of those, not like the ENTJ thing, but it's like, determine what your career should be. And it said I should be a journalist. And then they give you these salary tables, and I'm like, I don't know about that. But then ironically, I kind of feel like now I am a bit of a journalist. Like I'm a financial markets pontificator / journalist in a way. So, my path, I guess, took all these roundabout ways, but eventually I kind of found a way to combine the math and the creativity.
I'm curious, with when you're a kid and they sell this building and like they make the money from selling the building. Do they talk about this? Are they like, the money came from selling the building? Are you aware of this later, or in the moment does this imprint on you?
Well, no, I knew about it at the time because they retired. They sold the business and retired when they were 40. So, okay. But it was kind of like, I don't know, things were kind of different in the 80s. Like people didn't talk about stuff openly. It was more like whisper, whisper, whisper. You kind of hear, and then like nobody talks about it again. Oh, this happened. Okay, great. Okay, cool. But like, I don't know. I think talking about money and just personal goings on, people are just a lot more transparent now. I feel like in the 80s, everything was kind of like hush hush. You learned about things, but it wasn't like openly talked about. It was more like, oh, they're not working anymore. And they're like, yeah, well, they sold their building and sold the company. They're retiring. We're like, okay. And then that's the whole conversation. So,
and then what about in the travels, like going to a place like the Caribbean, which, I mean, I've actually still never actually been to the Caribbean.
What?
I remember this. Yeah, believe it or not, I've never done the Caribbean vacation. I guess I'm long overdue.
What's even happening right now?
What's even happening right now? But as a kid, like doing this, is that the first time you go abroad, I guess? Is that?
Well, yes, I did travel a little bit because my parents got divorced when I was young, and I moved to Calgary with my mom. So I used to travel on like planes by myself and stuff to go back and forth to see my dad. But yeah, those trips were the first time other than driving to Myrtle Beach, that I went away. And, you just learn a lot of things like, what are all these forks doing on here? Like, all that kind of stuff. How to eat in a fancy place and stuff like that. But also, honestly, just as a kid, you just know what you know, right? I knew riding my bike around and playing tennis on the concrete tennis courts and all that. And then you go to Barbados and there's like, whoa, these are like clay tennis courts. And there's a dude here that will like teach you whenever you want. You just show up and he'll teach you how to play tennis. And, it was like this whole other world that just blew my mind.
I'm curious. So you take the test in middle school or whatever the equivalent to middle school is in Canada at the time. When, like, do you keep tracking this? I know you didn't want to be a journalist because you saw the income that you would earn, But like, where are the interests in high school? What do you want to do? What are you in love with?
Well, so Wall Street came out, I think in 87, I'm pretty sure.
Wall Street,
And
the
then
movie,
the
Charlie Sheen and all
movie,
that. Yeah.
yeah. So as soon as I saw that, because I knew I wanted to make money, as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. So I started really getting interested in finance like quite young, like 14 or 15. And then I read Liar's Poker around that time too. I mean, I had a friggin' subscription to like the Financial Post. I remember on the stock market crash day, because there was no internet, obviously. So I remember waiting I guess it would have been like October 20th, 1987, waiting for the Financial Post to come. And it would come like wrapped up in a piece of plastic on the front step, because I wanted to see if there were any stocks that went up, because that was obviously that day, the market was down 25% or whatever. And it's so crazy. Like it was the same thing with the box scores. Like you'd want to see the newspaper in the morning to read the box scores in baseball. It's mind blowing to think about how different the information ecosystem was at that time. So I was interested in trading and financial markets right from that moment. And again, like not one little bit of me saw Wall Street, the movie, as like this corrupt, evil cautionary tale. I was just like, oh man, those guys look so cool. This looks awesome. So yes, I was deceived. And I think Oliver Stone actually said, and Michael Lewis has said as well, that like they both kind of regret creating these glorified takes on Wall Street, because they were supposed to be cautionary tales, and what they did was actually make it look sexy.
Well, neither of them thought they were doing it at the time, right? I think in both of those comments, when they say it, they're like, I didn't expect anybody to interpret it this way.
Right. Yeah. It's so funny.
So how, like, what's foot in the door? Do you start trading your own account at 14, 15? What's foot in the door to this existing?
So I actually did. And I remember even the stocks that I traded, it was called Sinram. That was the first stock I traded. And it was a compact disc manufacturer.
Nice.
And weirdly, it followed the arc of compact discs perfectly. Like it was a genius thing to buy, because compact discs were getting popular. So whenever that was, like 1988 or something. And then it went up for a while, and then eventually compact discs weren't popular anymore and it went down. I'm pretty sure they ended up going bankrupt. And I used to chart the stock on graph paper and like stick pieces of graph paper. I had like 10 pieces of graph paper all attached. And there was this thing actually that sounds so bizarre now, but it was a learn by mail course that I took, and they would send a little binder every like 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember my mom splitting it, and it was like a big negotiation to get her to pay half. And they would send a little binder, and it would be like the stock market, or like there was even a thing about options and like what are mutual funds or whatever. And each one was like a little binder, and it had little like cards that you could flip through and stuff. So I was learning about finance at that time, and I was already like researching like how do you become a trader? So I knew I was going to go to business school. And then, I mean, I just followed that. And like I said, that gave me a lot of motivation to get high marks. I mean, my grades are always pretty decent anyways, but that gave me a lot of motivation to be pretty, ambitious. And also like, I was always a big metagame person. So I always knew like, okay, this teacher will, give me better marks if I do this. And I always was kind of like playing the game of academics throughout the whole time.
You understood it was a game. You understood not just like I study hard because I'm supposed to. You understood there's a
certain
sequence.
Ways to optimize or whatever. And actually that was one of the coolest things. So Ben Hunt, who obviously I know wrote the foreword to Alpha Trader. And the coolest thing that I thought because not that many people had read the book at that point, was how he wrote that it's kind of a book about games, about playing and winning games, even though I wasn't writing it with that intent. And I thought that was a cool, kind of a neat compliment from Ben, because it was unexpected and it wasn't my intent, but really it's accurate, because I view financial markets and I kind of view everything as a game. And it's like, that makes it sound like you're not taking it seriously, but I do take it seriously. don't take myself that seriously in the context of what's happening. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like I do take it seriously, but also, you know, I've seen pictures of the earth from very far distances, and I know it's not that important.
That's interesting because it gives you like a layer. There's the perspective layer of saying, I want to understand this thing and how this works, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah. And I think that helped me because no matter how, like, you know, there's bad times in trading, times when you want to give up, times like I worked for Lehman Brothers when it went under. And I never really felt like it was ever the end of the world. Like, even if I got fired or like, I was never really going to blow up, but I could bleed to death trading. No matter whatever happened, I always felt like, you know, there's plenty of things I can do in the world, or I'll just get back up and figure out another way to trade again. And I mean, that's what happened with my day trading. Was it went super well for a long time, and then I never blew up, but it was just death by 1,000 cuts because there was like a massive regime change in 2001. And at that time, I didn't have any tools to understand or identify or like be aware that regime change was so important when you're trading. And so I just kept on doing the same thing I was doing from 98 to 2001. And, you know, post April 2001, none of the things that I did worked anymore. And I just kept on doing them. And funny enough, I started losing money.
Funny how that works. Take me back to business school. Do you go straight from the high school experience of playing that game into college, or was it a different path for you?
Yeah, no. So I went to I was like, okay, what does Wall Street want? I'm going to Wall Street. Like, I was reverse engineering it. So like the best business school in Canada at that time was Western, the Ivy School, which is still a good school. I don't know if it's the best anymore. I honestly am not sure. There's a lot of good business schools now in Canada, but at the time that was the one. So I went there. They had a really good recruiting program. So like all the places, actually the hilarious thing from that time is the most coveted jobs were Citibank Foreign Exchange, because the Bourse game was this big game that they did globally and everyone knew about it. And so trading FX was like the baller job at Citi, natural gas at Enron, and trading bonds at Salomon Brothers. So yeah, two of those three things don't exist anymore. Actually, Citi bought Salomon. And so I ended up getting recruited by like the different places, and I ended up actually going to FX at Citi.
How'd you pass up with the Michael Lewis interest, the Salomon Brothers gig?
So Salomon, I didn't get offers from everywhere. Salomon, I didn't get an offer. I think Lehman and Salomon were two places I did not get offers. And, yeah, I can't remember. Salomon was bought soon after that, but I think it was around the same time that I was recruiting was when they got bought. Actually, a fun fact about Salomon was, this was a rumor. I don't know if it was true, but the way you wrote Salomon Brothers Inc. was with no dot after Inc. I don't know why. It was just like this aesthetic flourish.
Google tests.
Yeah.
School buses filled with marbles.
Yeah. Artistic flourish or whatever. So if you put Salomon Brothers Inc. period on your cover letter, you got discarded right away. That was like the first filter for people, apparently. And it's funny, in those days you were sending things by paper. So I remember like you had to get a good quality printer, because like the printers that everyone had were pieces of shit. And then you would go and buy like good quality paper, and then you'd be like, oh, this is too heavy. This stock is too heavy. Oh, this is too cream colored or whatever. Like, I remember there was like a whole thing. It's kind of reminiscent of the American Psycho scene.
The business cards in American Psycho.
But we were doing that with like paper and trying to figure out which cover letter paper to use.
It's amazing, because I feel like these are the things that were lost on when The Office had its resurgence, like in the pandemic, and everyone was watching. It was like, you don't understand like some of this paper cardstock stuff they're talking about. It's a really big deal to us.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about all this throwback stuff, because I don't think about it very often, but it definitely is jarring to think about the technology situation when I was 20 versus what it is now, and just like how everything, as everyone knows, but when you just think about how different everything felt in those days and how kind of rudimentary and tactile and simple everything felt in those days, it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a really interesting perspective on and I just had another recording it'll be out probably around the time when this comes out with Julia Carrion. And she talks a lot about digital transformation, and she actually reframes a lot of it back to haptics, about like the actual touch and feel of stuff.
Right.
And whereas
right.
everybody else talks about the absorption of social media and smartphone, she steps back and is like, no, like touching a screen is actually more profound and it's like us touching a piece of paper or something, or a business card. It's wild.
Yeah, I do sometimes still. I remember when I switched from BlackBerry to iPhone thinking like, this is stupid. There's no keyboard. What? And then everyone's like, dude, you'll get used to it. And honestly, I think I was right. I think typing on an iPhone is still a horrible experience, but I mean, I do it obviously, but I don't know. I think I got to buy one of those. I've seen those like clicky things that you can click on and then it gives you a proper keyboard on your iPhone. You ever tried one of those?
I have tried one. I was actually really intrigued by like getting one for a laptop for a while, because I knew somebody who had like an iPad extension thing. And I was like, I think I could do that. But as a kid who learned to type on a typewriter, I also have like a weird thing about like, I want the keyboard to feel a certain way.
Right.
And that in between is for some reason worse.
Okay.
Thumbing on glass, I'm like, this is garbage anyway. But if you give me that in between state, it's like I hate typing on a laptop keyboard even. Like,
I guess it's all going to be like straight mind to keyboard interface pretty soon anyway. So it doesn't matter.
And with my level of ADHD, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. Like if I thought auto crash was bad, like
your
ADHD
internal monologue's just going to start showing up on your phone.
It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a disaster. Okay. When do you graduate? Like what year is the school end?
So I did 2 years of economics. The way it worked at Western was you did 2 years of anything and then you go to biz school. So I did 2 years of economics and 2 years of business school, graduated in 95. So that's like the start of email and internet and things like that. But still I started at Citibank, still in the morning, there was a guy that came around with the printouts of like Bridgewater's daily observations on paper, and he would hand them all out. And like Bob Savage was like the god of trading at Goldman in those days. And they would print out his comments, and it was all still paper-based. Oh, and Gartman, of course. We would get all those things on paper. And then obviously that was when kind of email started. And the interesting thing about the evolution of that business is when I started, so there was no electronic trading really at that time. There was computerized trading in the stock market, but not really in FX. So the amount of transactions in FX is just like mind-boggling, right? There's like all the big transactions, but then there's people doing 1.3 million here, 0.6 million there, and human beings were processing all that. So the spot desk, like spot FX being like the liquid flow desk in currency trading, had 30 people on it. And there was like small, medium, and large yen. So like under 5 to 20, and 20 above. And then there was actually, it was before the Eurozone, before the Euro. So there was like the guy that traded marks against French francs and pesetas and all that. So that created even more jobs. And now most of the spot desks are like 2 people, 3 people, and all those trades are being handled electronically. So it's an interesting automation of trading, sort of microcosm there, where spot desks went from these super huge, massive, busy desks to almost fully automated now.
And you're in New York City for this?
I started in Toronto, but very shortly after I started, they centralized trading by time zone. So the way it used to work was like, there was a trading floor in Frankfurt, in Paris. Like, so there was City Paris, City Frankfurt, City London, City Toronto, City New York. And there was trading in all those centers. And they were basically all competitors. Like, I used to get run over by my own London like all the time. And then they realized, or they decided this is not very efficient. So they centralized by time zone. So then all the trading in North America went to New York, all of Europe went to London, et cetera. So I was only in Toronto for like 4 or 5 months, and then I went to New York.
So what happens in New York? You're working this job, but I know this is where like the turnover starts to happen. The movie, eventually the cartoon. Like what happens in New York? Why doesn't this stick?
Well, it was just the job itself. Kind of, I was disillusioned by the lack of intellectual stimulation because I guess I never really thought about it. Like you don't really know what the job actually is, right? When you go into a job when you're 21 years old or whatever. And I just didn't realize how much of it was just doing whatever other people are telling you to do, like just sell 100, buy 40, sell 30. There was no risk taking the way we think of it now. It was just a pure flow business. So there's kind of a spectrum in trading, like in market making, from 100% flow to 100% risk taking. And it's moved across that spectrum, even with the global financial crisis and Dodd-Frank. There's much more risk taking in businesses now than there was in, say, like 1997. I mean, you just didn't really have time to take risk. All you were doing was trying to keep your position straight and executing for clients. And that was it. You were just too busy there was no like global macro idea generation or anything like that. You were just doing flow and trying to stay alive and not get your head ripped off, essentially. So for me, I just didn't find it that intellectually stimulating. And, I guess I just felt like, I don't know if I want to do this. And if I am going to try something else, I better do it now because I'm not going to do it when I'm 29 years old or whatever. I guess I had a tiny bit of wisdom, even though I was pretty dumb.
That's okay. It's good to have a little wisdom when you're at that age doing that
a
type
tiny
of stuff.
spark.
I'm really curious in this aspect of it too. Like looking back now, this ties back to what you're saying just a minute ago. Looking back now, do you kind of look at that as because there was 30 people on that spot desk, because there was so many people, is having so many people all having to do jobs and racing around doing stuff that literally has to get done. Like these transactions have to happen. But is that part of what like saps the intellectuality out of it just because there's just so much friggin' work to do?
I think, yeah, just the sheer volume of transactions. So if I contrast it to being a market maker on a spot desk, let's say in 2018, then almost all the transactions are electronic. All the people that are just pure flow traders have been adversely selected out of the business because there's not enough flow to make money as a flow trader anymore. So then what you're left with is a job where, and this really started around like 2003 because that's when electronic trading started growing in FX, is then you have a job that's much more about idea generation, talking to clients, taking views, taking positions, taking risk. And so the job function of being a market maker in FX just completely changed. And to me, in a very positive way. So by 2003, the show Daft Planet got canceled. I wasn't making money anymore day trading. I was like slowly bleeding away my account. I was about to get married. So I was like, maybe it's time for me to get a real job. And also I'd been out for 5 years and I felt like somewhere in my mind, like the statute of limitations on, the few people I knew and having worked for, 3 years as an FX trader, I felt like that was going to run out soon. So I thought, okay, maybe I got to get a real job. And I was doing it more out of necessity at that time. But then when I got back into it, I was like, oh, wow, this is actually way better than it used to be because people mostly hated the machines and the algorithmic stuff. But for me, it was kind of a good thing because it took the drudgery out of it. It took like the most boring part of the job was now automated. And then it left the more interesting part, which was thinking about markets and trying to solve like the macro puzzle and things like that. And there was still enough flow. I mean, some banks there still is now, but definitely in those days, like from 03 to 08, there was still enough flow to make money as a human. Like the algorithms weren't doing everything. So there was enough money to make money, there was enough flow to make money. And then you could use that to kind of leverage your ideas. So, the most conservative banks had this model, like take risk, but don't lose money, which is sort of like something that people make fun of, but is kind of a reasonable model. If you have a good franchise, then you try to take the money you're making off the franchise and leverage it into more money by trading good ideas. But if the franchise makes 300 grand in a day, you don't lose 600 on your ideas. You know what I mean? So, and then at that time, so the stupidest thing for me was, so I came back, I was a Euro trader, and every single morning there's like 15 salespeople. They all call me on the hoot. Hey, Brent, what do you think about Euro? And then some of the people that I was working with were still like old school flow traders who just didn't have a view. They just trade the flow and whatever. So then people start asking me about other currencies too, like quietly, because they didn't want the dollar yen trader to hear, but like, what do you think about dollar yen too? And so I was like, there's got to be a more efficient way to do this than to tell 15 people, 3 views on 3 different currencies. That's 45 times I got to tell people stuff every day. This seems stupid. So I started writing this short email just saying, here are my views for today. And then a couple of times people were like, oh, this is great. Do you mind if I send it to a client? And then I was like, well, I'll clean it up a little bit. I'll put a chart in it or whatever. And then, fast forward to now, that's kind of been my thing since 2005. I've been writing this daily called AMFX, which is basically 1 to 3 pages of just my thoughts on macro and FX. And it's kind of grown over the years into like more of a polished product. And, but the fun thing is that I guess my brand, like I never really consciously said like, oh, here's what my brand's going to be when I'm 28 years old or whatever. But my brand, I guess, is like finance that's not totally boring. Like I try to make it a little bit interesting and make weird analogies and try to put some humor and random weird facts and stuff like that. So my brand, I guess, kind of developed into like the knowledgeable person about FX who has ideas and who can write something interesting. And I think I can't remember if it's Altica or somebody has written about stacking talents. I mean, maybe a lot of people have, I'm not sure, but I think Altica wrote about it once. Altucher.
Yeah.
Is he still around?
We won't say anything disparaging. He goes back and forth between phases, but he's a fascinating guy. I've learned a lot from him. I
mean, I was really into him in like 2011, 2012 era. I found his stuff really interesting, and then I just kind of lost track of him. But anyways, moving right along.
Him and what's his name from the Dilbert guy. I think that idea comes from him originally.
Oh, okay,
the talent stacking thing, because I've long been fascinated by the scout sector.
Kind of by accident, I guess I stacked like a very strong risk appetite and a interest in writing and creativity. And that's kind of a weird combination because first of all, like a lot of people that go into finance are more quantitative and, not as creative. And then people find this very surprising, but I've managed many, many, many traders over the years and like hired tons of analysts. Most people that come into trading roles are actually risk averse, like not as risk seeking as you would think. And so I guess maybe part of my whole, like, I take it seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously thing or whatever. I don't know. I was that I just always liked taking risk, and I was never really that scared of taking risk. And so having a strong risk appetite and like, I guess just good communication skills was an unusual combination. I think it still is a fairly unusual combination, honestly. I mean, like that's Jared Dillion's kind of thing as well. I mean, him and I are similar in a lot of ways. I'm friends with him, so I'm not being weird. So that's kind of how it all evolved, was a lot of randomness in there. And then, but I guess kind of just playing to my strengths without ever really knowing what I was doing. And then, like I said, with all the stuff with Daft Planet and day trading and all that, really all that stuff in the end, like objectively was a failure, but it was awesome. And I'm glad I did it. And like, I don't really care that I failed. In fact, those are some of the most fun times of my life. And I learned so much too from all that stuff. And like, so even my writing, like, I feel like I can write about trading from every vantage point because like I've traded, I was also PM at a hedge fund for a while. So I've traded very, very different amounts of capital from like 25 grand in a day trading account to like $400 million in a hedge fund. So I feel like that has given me extra, I was going to say credibility, but not really credibility, just like a good understanding of the different points of view that, and also the similarities of, you know, small, medium, and large traders face many, many of the same hurdles, but then there's unique challenges to each of those. And I think I can understand those and write about them in a, like a fairly, you know, understandable way.
So do you end up like mostly geographically located in the States at this point? Are you bouncing back and forth? Where are you geographically first?
So yeah, I live in Connecticut and I've lived here since '09. I did move back to Canada for the day trading and Daft Planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I was back in Canada from I guess 98 to 06. Then I moved to work for Lehman. Lehman went under. Then I moved to Connecticut. And for a long time I commuted, which I was able to justify. But now that I'm not doing it, I'm very glad that I'm not doing it. And so the firm I work for now, I can write and then I express all my ideas. And then I cover hedge funds and banks and give them ideas in FX and FX options. So I kind of sit in my own office in the middle of nowhere. But then we have a Zoom and it actually has kind of like a trading floor vibe because there's the guys from Singapore, or sorry, from Asia and from London are on there. And then the guys in New York and some of the people are work from home. And there's kind of like a bit of a trading floor vibe, actually more of a trading floor vibe than when I left as a market maker, because that was like right in the middle of COVID and everyone was work from home except for 3 of us were declared essential workers and came into the office every single day.
Did getting like centered geographically that I mean, you had kids along the way, you've got, I think 2 boys, like did that help being geographically centered? Was that part of the decision too?
I mean, I really like the quality of life in Connecticut. I like the seasons. I like kind of everything about it. The only thing that sucks is just being away from family. I feel like that's a decision that you kind of make in your 20s to be, you know, to pursue professional dreams. And you don't really, like, I wouldn't change anything, but I don't think I appreciated how much of a hit it is to be away from family when you have kids and, you know, your dad sees your kids 3 times or 4 times a year and that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But I mean, those are just the trade-offs that you make. Although I will say that, like I said, I don't think I really realized I was making them. I was just pursuing a dream, and I wasn't thinking too much about it, I guess.
Did the kids have any interest, just curiously? Oh, teenagers now? You got teenagers?
Yeah, they're 16 and 20.
Do they care at all about, are they watching the new Wall Street and getting inspired? Or any of them picking up Michael Lewis?
So it's funny because my older son has a brain very much like mine. Like, do you know Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, the game.
So
Yeah.
he is an absolute god at that game. Like he's been playing since he was like 13. He plays against like, you know, 30 people that are all older than him and like wins all the time. And he's just like he's very, very good at it, which that game translates well to markets. And he likes, you know, gaming the economies, the internal economies of the video games that he plays. And like, so he has all that. But honestly, I kind of have steered him away from it because, I mean, we could have a whole big conversation about this, but the thing about finance to me is it's a huge trade-off because you're just doing something that's not very useful, and accepting that, like, it's kind of taken me a long time to accept that. And I do accept it because I feel like making money has given me many, many things, and like in terms of freedom and even in terms of creative freedom. But I also feel like it's not the direction that I would steer my kids, if you know what I mean. Like if they were going to go there on their own, totally fine. But I feel like there's definitely always been for me this existential angst about like, what are we actually doing here? You know, like there's numbers going up and down on the screen and people are yelling at each other and arguing about, you know, whether the fill should be 29 or 29.4. So there is kind of like this element of you have to kind of make your peace with it. There's a great Ben Hunt quote of Woody Allen. Do you know this quote?
Go ahead and say it to me.
No. Do you know the one? Because I'm not sure if I can quote it or not.
Well, let's try. We can always
it's like
make a little edit around this if we have to.
The guy goes to the psychiatrist and says, my brother thinks he's a chicken. And the psychiatrist says, well, have you told him? And he says, no, we can't because we need the eggs. It's something like that.
It's something along those lines. Yes, I'm familiar with this.
That's kind of like what finance is. Like you kind of know it's just a game and it's not totally real, but it does give you wonderful eggs, if you know what I mean. And I mean, I love the job. It's fun. It's enjoyable. But I also think that if my son was a school teacher or, you know, addiction counselor or something or whatever, you know, just something more human, in the end, maybe he would be happier, but I don't know for sure.
No, it's really interesting because I don't think number one, not everybody is as kind of like meta aware of that as a topic inside of the industry. I think a lot of people live in denial and they don't really think about how their kids are observing what they're observing and what they might want to chase and why. So I think that's important just to say out loud. But then the other part of this of like that existential dread's been inside of you for a long time. So I want to pull this thread for a second. Like is this part of where, when do you start reading like Hajikura and getting into like all this stuff?
Well, so the thing is for me is I'm okay with it because I feel like in order to be happy, I needed a certain amount of money and financial freedom. But then I think I'm on the very flat part of the money versus happiness curve now. And I think my ability to get to that flat part means that now my kids are on a flatter part of the curve as well, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So the trade-off or the risk reward for them chasing money is not as good because they're kind of backstopped in a certain way. Not that they're going to inherit like $25 million, but they're, you know, if there's a trip to Europe, they're going to be able to go to it. And if they need a down payment for a house or whatever. I mean, I'm sensitive to like, if you give your kids too much, you ruin them, but also they know they kind of have like a built-in backstop. So I think that's why it's different, is that for me, I wanted to get to that flat part of the money versus happiness curve. And I'm glad I did, but also have I, you know, made the world a better place outside of a very small radius? I'm not totally sure. Not really, I guess. Like, you know, within my cohort of friends and family, I'm doing my best. And I think Ben would attest to that. I mean, I do try to make people's lives better. But is my occupation inherently doing that? I mean, obviously, well, I think obviously not.
At the margin, I think you're actually doing more than you probably realize because of how strong that pull back into the void is around a lot of the people in the industry. I think actually the writing and the stuff, like watching what you and Jared Dillian and other people put out there, it's like those little reminders that there's more to this than that.
Right.
Is more substantial than maybe you give credit. Go ahead.
One thing that's been really rewarding actually from that point of view, which again wasn't intentional, was when I wrote Alpha Trader, like basically when I write stuff, I never think like I'm going to sell X number of copies or like, I don't know. I don't think much about it. It's just like it's in me and I want to get it out is more like the process. And then also I thought it would help my trading to get all of everything that's in my head kind of out in a coherent way. And I feel like there's so many books about trade ideas, but not that many about like the whole holistic process of trading, from like trade idea generation all the way to risk management and all that. So, but one really nice benefit of that is I have got some like crazy humbling emails and messages and stuff from people saying like, they were in the pits of despair and the worst part of their trading career, and they read my book, and, it's probably coincidence, but, they had the Phoenix rose from the ashes, and they credit me, and that kind of stuff definitely feels good. But that also is a glimpse of like, imagine being a teacher. you know, you'd be doing that stuff every day instead of once every 3 months. But anyways, I feel like this is going down to like overly existential, and the existential stuff for me, it's like I think about it, and I mean I've written about it in my books, and I think it's worth thinking about, but it's not something I obsess over. I accept that this is a certain kind of job, and the thing is like, you do need a job. This is a pretty damn good job. It's fun, pays well, and I get to talk to a lot of smart people, and have fun every day. So
before I ask you a little bit more about just sort of like Spectra Markets and what you're doing with that these days, I'm curious too. Actually, no, I want to ask you about that first. So like, there's the whole educational component. You guys are running a number of different services. I'm not asking you this for like the plug of the services. Go to the website, check it all out. But like, there feels like there's a little bit more of that mission that comes through this too. There's the bit.
So yeah, I do enjoy, like, one thing I learned through my career, because there was a point where I kept getting promoted. I was working at a bank, and a lot of people were leaving, and it was the Peter principle. Like, I just kept getting promoted to the point where like I basically became a not a very good trader and not a very good manager, because I was still trying to focus on markets and trade. So I learned from that I don't like management, and then I kind of like withdrew from management and went back to trading. But the one thing I did like about working at banks was the mentorship and like teaching people, people who want to learn, who are humble. I really enjoy that part of it. And I feel like there's this gap of, there's a lot of theoretical knowledge out there, and there's a lot of like really bullshit stuff, like about technicals and get rich quick kind of stuff. But in between is like the world where real markets happen. And I feel like there isn't that much material actually teaching that. So what I'm trying to do is kind of create a bridge between the theory and the reality. Like the simplest way to explain it would be, I remember after like a month at Citi saying, man, I feel like I learned more about markets in this 1 month than I did in like 4 years of economics and biz school. And it's kind of an exaggeration, but like, I feel like what you learn in school is the scaffolding, but then you just don't learn really like, why do stocks actually go up and down? It's not discounted cash flows, obviously. And so I created this course called Think Like a Market Professional, which is essentially a synthesis of everything that I've learned. Like, it's, the stuff that Ben talks about, narrative. Actually, Ben Hunt is one of the videos in the course about narrative, and kind of bringing together a bunch of people that I respect, like Jim Grant, Ben, Danielle, DiMartino Booth, and a bunch of people, to talk about their areas of expertise, and then just try to pull it all together into a course that bridges the gap between, textbooks and the real world. So I feel like that kind of stuff, I think I just do it naturally because I enjoy it. And I've done it with so many analysts and people coming through different programs at banks, that I have a pretty good idea now of like what people know and what they don't know. And so, yeah, that's the idea.
Music. Wonderful story. I encourage people, go listen to your talk with Kevin Weir too, because that was an excellent one on Market Huddle. Kevin tried to get you on the ropes with defending electronic music. And I know there's like a period that maybe is sacred to you, possibly because of where you are, but just, are you still an electronic music guy? Still an EDM guy?
I am. I mean, there's sort of two different groups. Like, I listen to this stuff from like the glory days when I used to go to clubs and all that. And that's more of like, obviously nostalgic, like
And you're like a
dopamine
late
rush.
90s, like
Yeah,
what's
like
your glory days?
9803,
Okay.
coinciding with the day trading and all that, and the lack of no family or job responsibilities, basically tends to be more uh, tends to help with that kind of that culture. But anyways, so I listen to that stuff, but then I like Dead Mouse, Skrillex, all this sort of like JPEG Mafia, which isn't like exactly electronic, it's more like rap
You
and
just made my day
noise.
with that, just for the
Like,
record. Huge
what's
fan.
that?
You just made my day for that one, just for the record. Huge
Um,
fan. We'll come to that.
it's like noise, so it's like
Yeah.
noise / rap. And then I get a lot of influence from my kids too, because they're more into hip hop, which I was never really like a big hip hop person. I never really dislike any genre, because I feel like if you don't like a genre or you think it all sounds the same, it just means like you don't understand it or you don't appreciate it. So like I would
Yeah.
never say like, oh, that all sounds the same. That's just like shows that you haven't studied it or understood it. But I never appreciated hip hop until my kids got into it more. So, I'm a little bit more into that now than I was, like Logic and Kendrick and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of two different eras. One, I think there's a thing that music that you listen to from the age of 13 to 23, nothing can ever compare to that, because of it's your formative years. So I do sometimes find I want to access that like deep feeling that you got when you listen, like, when you heard some track in a club for the first time. And you can't really get that listening to Spotify in the car. But so I feel like there's kind of two levels of um, love, like the music from that period, I'll always love more, but I still like the music now. I guess it's like love versus like, maybe.
There's something in there. And you could turn it up pretty loud in the car, at least when you're
Yeah.
by yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you
You can
can
have your
replicate it a
moment.
little bit. And actually, one artist that I didn't appreciate until I started to get to know him more after he died was Avicii, because I think my kind of impression was it's a little bit like cheesy commercial. But then the only reason that's the case is that he actually pretty much made it commercial by being so creative and awesome. Like, and then if you've seen the documentary or read the book about his life, every single good artist in the world was like, this guy is fucking amazing. Like, he's so creative and so good at his job. Sad, very sad book, obviously. So retrospectively, I've learned to appreciate Avicii's music a lot more too.
That's one of those, I'm always on the look for like your favorite artist's favorite artist. Like you want to know who those people
Yeah.
are. And he's one of those people
what's
who
a really
crested.
good, a good rabbit hole to go into is, so his name's Tim Burling, right? If you go into his music when he was Tim Burling, before he was Avicii, some of that stuff is pretty awesome. Like it's the whole, like it's Swedish House Mafia era when they before they got big. But he has some music, like I think it's even on Spotify, like just put Tim Burling in there and there's some like old, it's like very crunchy, kind of more basic, house music from that era, not as commercial sounding.
I don't think I've ever gone down that rabbit hole with that stuff. I'm gonna have to check that out. I'm very curious. And no like Canadian, any Canadian music shout outs you want to do? I mean,
the craziest thing in Canadian music is the Tragically Hip. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah, of course.
So we would go see them at like Maple Leaf Garden or like stadiums in Canada, and they would sell out like 30, 40,000 people, right? And then I'd go see them at Webster Hall in New York, and there'd be like 300 people there. It's like the greatest non-crossover in the history of pop culture. Like, they're one of the biggest bands in the history of Canada. And like, Northeastern US people kind of know them maybe, or like real music people might know them. That for them, I can't really separate the time and place from like whether the music's actually amazing, because like I just grew up listening to them. So all like the mosh pit era music from that time, like Rage Against the Machine and Tragically Hip and all that whole era is like a whole other thing where it's just like a time and a place. And that's an interesting thing just thinking about that now as you get older, because there's not as many moments like that. You just don't go to as many clubs and concerts and stuff when you're 50 as you did when you were 25, is that the time and place thing has transformed. Like for me, like Phoebe Bridgers now is COVID. That's the time and place. Like when I listen to Phoebe Bridgers, I get taken right back to 2020 COVID times. And that's not as fun of a flashback as, mosh pits to Rage Against the Machine.
It's not nearly as satisfying. No, you're definitely right on that. Pup. Do you know Pup? Did you become a Pup fan at all?
No.
Pup's one of the, I'll find you something. There's a wonderfully nostalgic 90s video for a Pup song. I can't remember which one. I can't remember if it was on Morbid Stuff for the album before. They were like one of my last pre-pandemic concerts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I got to see them go from being like the 100-person band to the way bigger, like,
oh man. So I have a crazy story about that.
Or something. Yeah, go ahead.
That thing that's the best thing. So
my favorite moment is that
the summer of, I hope I get the year right, because if someone fact checks me, it could be wrong, but I think I'm pretty sure it was 92. I went to see Pearl Jam at the Robert Gertain Arena in Hull, Quebec. It's like a semi-pro hockey arena that holds like 5,000 people. And I was right at the front. And the craziest thing was, it was one of those, like, it's super hot. So Eddie, somehow they had a hose and they were spraying water on everyone. And I had this heavy t-shirt on, like that was like, that thick material t-shirt, those uncomfortable shirts.
And this was like the shirt you still have from 1992.
Well,
like in the drawer that never totally deteriorated because it's
it probably would still be alive if I still had it. And I was 20 years old. So like in those days, it wasn't weird to like, I took my shirt off and just threw it away because it was like, we were right at the front and it was soaking wet. So then we get out of the concert, like the whole thing ends, whatever. And we climb up the hill to go to the bus. And it was this weird blue and red striped shirt. It wasn't a concert shirt. And my friggin' shirt was sitting at the bus stop. It was the weirdest thing. It somehow migrated from the front of the stage to the bus stop. And there's no way, it wasn't like it was a Pearl Jam shirt. So it was a coincidence. It was like this random shirt. So somehow probably someone took it and then said, oh, this is stupid, and left it or whatever. But I was like,
did you reclaim the shirt?
Yeah, I put it back on. Yeah. It was awesome.
That's so awesome.
But that was like right when 10 came out, and then obviously, or it might have even been right before it came out. I can't remember. But anyways, that was like seeing Pearl Jam with 5,000 people was my equivalent of seeing Pup with 200, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. That's freaking amazing. All right. I got some notes. You've been very kind with time. I'm going to invite you to interrupt anywhere and everywhere as I go through some of these. So if this spawns an extra thought, that's part of the idea here. I love that you started us off with the tension between writing and finance math, because I think like there's a weird through line with you where this fascination with both like the cautionary tale that keeps you a little bit conservative, but also keeps you like more risk seeking of just being like, I want the good story. Like I want the journalist wants to cover the good story. The storyteller wants to see the good story. And it's like, that balance is there from the friggin' beginning with you. Like
I don't think I ever realized that or appreciated that, but there is something to be said for David Sedaris, you know who that is, right? Yeah, of course. Yeah. He said one time, he was talking about, he was on an airplane and a baby puked on him, and his partner was like, David, how come you're not even upset? And he was like, this is going to be amazing to write about. And I think in retrospect, some of like the shittier things that have happened to me have been amazing to write about. And so, yeah, you're kind of on the mark, is that that's one of the beauties of being a writer, I guess, is that when bad things happen, it's just more shit to write about.
And I reread Naked maybe like a year or two ago, and I'm on a reread I'm just on this like David Sedaris reread like binge in the last like 2 years.
He's
Every
the best.
time I don't know what to read, I just pull another one of those back off the shelf. I feel like they get better with the rereads.
So I went to see him recently. He was at a place near me, and it was really early. So he was sitting there doing the book signing, but no one else was in line yet. So I talked to him for like 5 minutes, and he's like super, super nice. And then I was getting him to sign a book. He has a bunch of Sharpies because he writes like little funny, weird things. And I said, can you write like to obviously you don't know Matt, but can you write Matt, you're the best? So he writes Matt, you're the, and then draws a huge breast and like colors it in and everything. It was like the most perfect David Sedaris thing.
That's exactly what you want from a David Sedaris Sharpie drawing. Oh, that's fantastic. I loved you told that story about your godparents and just finding like the whole other world out there, going on vacation thing. And I love this too. There was something about being probably, I'm a little bit younger than you, but like in the 80s, that hush hush thing and like the curiosity that stokes of being like, no, this is private. We just don't talk about this. But then it instills this like latent curiosity in a world where you just can't just Google everything. Like,
right. Yeah.
Wires are differently.
Yeah. You really just know your small circumference or your small world. And then, yeah, it's more mind blowing when you see outside of it. Whereas now no one's mind's going to be blown if they go to Thailand because they've already seen a million pictures of it and seen Instagram reels and all that.
It's so funny. I think about it. My wife and I were on this binge. It didn't finish them all, but like we were going back and rewatching all the Bourdain Parts Unknown. It's
right.
just like, or No Reservations, and filling it in from the aspect of being like, we both watched this when this was on TV, but the internet's made it so we can like watch them. And there's so many things in that show that are just like, is this how I learned that this was a thing in my life? When this was on TV?
Right. I mean, part of it is just like, I'm not necessarily saying one is better or worse. It's just we're a lot more worldly and educated now in a way because of the internet, right? Is you know a lot more of what's out there, and that I guess can be good or bad.
Well, it's thematically tied to this idea of like regime changes. It's thematically tied to you talking about the job and saying like, you don't truly know the job until you start doing it.
And that's one thing I try to do with internships is tell people like, even if you don't know what you want to do, start crossing things off and say like, okay, I definitely don't want to be in structuring, or like, I definitely don't want to be a flow trader or whatever, because for my experience, just enjoying the actual thing that I'm doing when I sit down for 10 hours a day is probably one of the most important aspects of the job, right? Is just like, do you actually like the thing that you're doing? And like, that's why I think people end up quitting law so much, is like, oh, I didn't know I was going to have to actually do this all day.
I'm into that. Which actually, this is the perfect segue. In like 2003, you were talking about the birth of the algos and everything else. And I'm paraphrasing you, but basically like automate the boring, which means you have to identify it, but automate the boring and leave the interesting. Really interesting here in like the meta game too, like the boring cautionary side of the business, but the interesting like journalist mentality side of, hey, I'm going to have these 15 conversations every morning, but getting the feedback to what people are paying attention to, just writing it down as an email in 2005 with the daily AMFX, like starting to become a thing, and going like, oh, this finance thing doesn't have to be totally boring.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it kind of goes to like, my advice to people going into finance is figure out the other thing that you're good at, like not necessarily to replicate what I'm doing, but to find, okay, everyone's super smart and probably pretty quantitative that's coming into finance. So what makes you special? Like what's your edge? And you know, a lot of people have different edges, but coming in as like a really smart person who's good at math is not really going to get you to the next level. It'll probably get you a job and a decent, you know, pay packet or whatever, but it's not really going to be like next level kind of exciting.
When you were talking about hiring and just kind of like the climb up the ladder and all the other things, you mentioned most traders coming in and being risk averse. And I made this note to myself because something you were saying was making me think of it's like because of perspective and getting these different vantage points. And it made me think about a number of the stories that you tell in the book in Alpha Trader, where you actually block stuff out. And I don't know if it's just learning about you and like the movies and the cartoon, but like you've been storyboarding stuff. Did you ever connect like storyboarding to the way you think through like a trade or a thesis?
Ooh, no, I haven't actually, but that's an interesting idea. That I should do a graphic novel of, or like not a full graphic novel, but like a 3-pager of a trade idea. That would be interesting.
That'd be really cool because
I'm going to write that down.
There's a thing you do in the book And it's one of those. So I remember getting your book and just being like, I know I like a lot of your writing. So I'm looking for the stories, and I'm like, it's more like I want the Jared Dillian like off to the side versus the trade stuff, because that's just, I'd rather read David Sedaris or whatever
stuff.
Yeah, it's just more fun to me. And it's fine. Like I like the technical stuff too, but it's just like, give me something interesting. And one of the things that you do brilliantly is, and I feel like I get it more now because of the cartoon somehow, like that storyboarding of perspectives. Most people never go through the exercise of learning how to perceive the story through different character lenses from all those things. And like, holy crap, isn't that just like a meta FX trader lesson?
That's interesting, because one of the times where I felt like I kind of leveled up a bit trading wise was when I was able to see myself acting like almost like third person, where I could see like, oh, you're doing that thing. You're doing the stupid thing. Don't do that. And it takes a long time to have that self-awareness of, and partly it just reps, I guess, is that if you make the same mistake enough times, you start to see yourself making it. But I started to feel like I kind of had this ability to go outside myself a little bit and go like, okay, if I was an objective person right now, what would I think of what Brent's doing? And I'd be like, oh, it looks pretty stupid actually, or not. And so it's interesting that you say that, because being able to switch your POV is kind of like a type of self-awareness, right? Is being able to get outside yourself and see yourself, maybe is kind of the definition of self-awareness. And that is something that's necessary for good trading. It's not something that I always have, but something I strive towards at least.
I think the meta awareness of knowing that you can tap into that is one of the most important things.
Right,
Even if you're not going to do it, just remembering that it's kind of like there.
It's a thing. It's possible. Yeah.
It might not even have the answer. And this, I know I was trying to not drag you back into existential angst or whatever. We talk about talking about trade spotting or the movie script idea or whatever else. But, and then just like, I wanted to see how you would connect that actually to your kids. And when you put it in the just sort of like finance and order fills and realizing that's not what's fulfilling, like there's a whole other part on the spectrum of life. And you talked about it on the happiness curve. And I think this is really kind of where I want to wrap this conversation, put a bow on it, is just remembering like you had to fight through up to that curve on the regime and in the world that you were in. And kudos to you. Like you got to the flat part of the curve where you can take care of your people and take care of that stuff. But then just to remind you too, because you made the analogy to like a teacher and what other, instilling those core values that aren't just the financial values in your kids, probably the most important lesson that anybody can pass forward in time to a future generation, full stop. But the other reality of it, teacher or not, it's still about like changing one world at a time. And you only change one world at a time if it's like with those little stories. And sometimes it's even those unintended stories and just being brave enough to put it out there in a book that to get like the email responses and other things you heard about, like you still change lives outside of yourself. You realize this, right?
Right. Yeah, I guess I can feel good about that. All right, I accept.
Feel good about it. Know that you did it. Tell the people where they can find you if they want to learn more.
Sure. The easiest way is just go to spectramarkets.com. So SPECTRA markets.com, and everything's there. That's just the easiest way.
Find all the links, find all the books, find the other things. I have to say, Brent Donnelly, you are truly an intentional investor. You are truly tragically hip in my book. You hold that title for now and forever. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.